try and get it there very soon. Well, ladies and gentlemen, with that little bit of information, let's jump right into the presentation, the whole reason you are with us this evening. Let me just share a couple of thoughts, a little bit of information about Dr. Minnick. If you've had a chance to attend a couple of our more recent larger events, you had a chance to learn from Dr. Minnick and learned that she is an incredibly qualified person to speak to our topic tonight, but so much more. As I have learned more about Dr. Minnick, my impression of her has grown greater, and we are fortunate to have someone of her caliber with us tonight. She is an internationally recognized wellness and lifestyle medicine expert. She is a creative visionary and an author. Dr. Minnick has had a diverse, well-rounded experience in the field of nutrition, including clinical practice, research, product formulation, marketing, writing, and education. Dr. Minnick has authored 5 books on health and wellness and over 15 scientific publications. Currently, she is Senior Advisor to the Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Institute in Seattle, Washington, and is adjunct faculty for the Institute for Functional Medicine, the Maryland University of Integrative Health, and the University of Western States. Her passion is teaching a whole self approach to nourishment and bridging the gaps between science, spirituality, and art in medicine. So folks, I think you can tell from that that we are, as mentioned a moment ago, just truly honored to have Dr. Minnick with us tonight. So Dr. Minnick, from the hundreds of folks that are on our webinar this evening, we appreciate you joining with us, and we will turn the time over to you to teach us where else to look, the secondary strategies for weight loss and vitality.
Fabulous. So wonderful to be here with everybody, and thank you, Scott, for that very generous, kind introduction. I realize I need to make my bio a little shorter, probably.
Well, and I even shortened it from what I had.
Oh, goodness.
It's lengthy, and it's extremely impressive.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be within the company of people connected to nature's sunshine. I've had the opportunity to meet many of you, and just most recently was at the Ottawa Convention. Fantastic. Everybody's doing great work. I love the products. I love what's new and coming out, and really building upon this concept of weight loss and vitality. And while many of us do focus on the number, we focus on how many pounds we're losing or kilograms, I think that what's really important here is we have this discussion to focus on the positive. How do we focus on where we want to be, what we want to look like, what we want to feel like? And that really is the essence of vitality, right? So how do we be more of that? And how do we get our energy back? You know, that's part of vitality too. It's not just about anti-aging, it's successful aging. And as part of that process, making sure that our body composition is healthy, that we feel good in our skin, we're mobile, we're functional, and we're able to really juice out of every moment of life that which really nourishes and invigorates us. You know, that's really the point, right? So tonight what I'd like to do is, of course, you know, I'm here for you. I'm here to answer your questions and to really be of service information. So I have lots of different things that we can talk about here, and what I mentioned to Scott before we got on the call is that perhaps after every section, perhaps we take some questions. So maybe some of you have comments or you want me to clarify some points. I'd be happy to do that. So we will make this more interactive, and maybe Scott just even jumps in and asks me a question if something isn't clear. So let's do that kind of in the spirit of making sure that we're addressing why you're here tonight. Okay, so let's start with the basics. Okay, so let me just see here, make sure there we go. Okay. Make sure we don't have any more technical issues here, right, Scott? We're right. Working the slides.
There we go. Looks like we're perfect.
Yeah, we're good now. Okay, so the basics as it relates to food and eating. You know, I just marvel at the idea that we probably are consumed by the act of eating more than consuming food, if you think about it. You know, we wake up, We start with breakfast. We end the day after having dinner. Essentially, our whole life, our whole day is punctuated by meals. So it's been estimated that we take in somewhere on average of 2,000 pounds or close to 1,000 kilograms of food in a year. So that amounts to like 5.5 million pounds within a lifetime. Not pounds, I'm sorry, interactions with food. We have a lot of interactions with food, and on a daily basis, it's been estimated to be something like 200 different interactions. So I feel that when we start talking about weight loss and vitality, we first need to talk about food, because food is medicine, food is information to our cells and our DNA. It's literally sending us signals to tell ourselves what to do and how to behave and what to do in the way of making proteins. So when we look at our bodies, we're essentially the culmination of many choices that we've made in life. And one of those big choices is what we choose to eat. Now, all of you are aware of the INFORM program, I'm assuming. And if you're not, you can definitely tap into our group and ask and get the material. But the INFORM program is really a process of transformation. And we talk about inform and transform. I love that because it's so true that when we inform ourselves through this INFORM program, we really do become transformed. There is a whole process that takes place. And as Scott mentioned, I'm not just a scientist focused on the body. I focus on the mind, the emotions, and the spirit, and bringing that all together because we're more than just what we see. Right? We've got emotions that come through us. We've got thought patterns that program how we make decisions. And we're also this wonderful life force that's connecting to all of nature. So I really want you to think about the whole context of eating and what we can bring to the meal. So on this slide, if you're looking at the slides, what you can see is essentially the basics of the INFORM program, starting with fruit at 1 serving, protein at 2, and I'm very big into protein, not from a paleo or high protein perspective, but from a detoxification perspective, and we're going to talk about why that is. Whole grains is also on here if you choose to do that at 2 servings, and there can be a lot of flexibility as to what constitutes a whole grain, especially for people that are gluten intolerant. And keep in mind that if we continue to eat the food that we are allergic or intolerant to, this prevents us from losing weight. It really does. So we have to make sure that we're eliminating and moving away from dysfunctional foods for our physiology. In fact, one of the great lines, this pearl of wisdom from one of my nutrition mentors, she said to me, she said, Deanna, I've noticed that when people are unhealthy or they're trying to lose weight or they've got some condition, the food that they're most drawn to might be the food that keeps them in dysfunction. So I just met a person the other day, as a matter of fact, and I always run into people. They want to talk about food because they find out what I do, and then they've got, everybody has an opinion around food. And in this discussion that I had with this friend, what he said to me is, tell me what to do, but one thing I won't give up is red wine. I'll never give up red wine and cheese. I love those products, but I'm really concerned about my joint pain. And I said, Jim, you know, you might have to be thinking about the foods that you love the most. Are they really the healthiest for you? And do you love your joints, or do you love the red wine and cheese? And perhaps just even trying it out and taking out those foods or beverages for a week to see how you do, right? So it's very important for me to mention that because food intolerances and allergies upregulate the immune system, create inflammation in the body, and when we have inflammation, it becomes very difficult to lose weight. In fact, it is thought that when we are inflamed, we gain weight. So either way we look at it, it's important to address food. Dairy or dairy alternatives, 2 per day, and then vegetables. Now we say here 5+. What I want to offer to you is that 5+ is, in my mind, really bare minimum. 5 is bare minimum. The average American gets 3.8 servings of fruits and vegetables per day. So if we just break that down into vegetable, I believe it's something like 1.8 servings. So if you're doing 5 servings of vegetables, I think that that's really good. And I think if you can push it even more, especially getting those green leafy vegetables, which change our metabolism through connecting with bitter receptors in our body, even better for weight loss. Okay? So a lot of those bitter greens, which we know from traditional medicine, that is very helpful for the liver, for detoxification, really include those in as much as you can. So this is a great guideline. You can tweak it to whatever works best for you. So the core program, so once we've got the foundation of food, we start to look at the core, right? We go through the A's, the B's, and the C's. And when we look at A, we think of activate. And when I look at the UltraTherm ingredient, really look at the wisdom that went into putting this product together, it's completely spot on. Having these botanicals in this array, and in fact, what's really interesting to me is that many of them are bitter or classified as bitter. Caffeine is seen as a bitter compound from plants. Definitely helps to get our thermogenic activity up. It helps to fuel our sense of heat in the body. And for some people can really be very good for just revving the system, helping with elimination, and helping with metabolism in the liver. Now the other active in UltraTherm that I like very much, and there's caffeine-free, by the way, and then there's with caffeine. There's also green tea extract, which I think is fantastic. Green coffee extract, another active, is fabulous. So you want to be thinking about how do all of these plant actives change metabolism. They do, and they do it in very complex ways. We know that all these phytonutrients that we see in nature are impacting the cell signaling behaviors. They're changing inflammatory pathways, insulin signaling pathways, and even stress response. So that's why I love this. The second piece of this is balancing. Now, when I was seeing patients at the Functional Medicine Research Center, one of the things I noticed is that people need a guiding light in terms of starting their day. They need a little bit of structure on how to make things work. And when they're trying to lose weight and really focus on their health, many times they need just that little bit of additional guidance. And having something like a protein shake or a smoothie helps them with keeping compliant. And I've noticed that 2 shakes a day made with protein can be great for keeping them on track, reducing satiety, and giving them that sense of fullness that they need so that their blood sugar is not like a roller coaster, going up, going down, going up, going down. Protein helps to stabilize. So you've got a lot of different options here for the different types of proteins depending on the different people. And my general recommendation here is to change it up. You know, really what works best with just about anything when we're talking food here is to get variety. Every 3 to 4 days, changing it up, allowing the body to develop that flexibility and fluidity in its response to these different foods and nutrients. Then we don't get so deficient, right? So here we've got a number of different choices, of course. I really like Nature's Harvest. I like the complexity of what else you have in there in the way of not just the protein, but different phytochemicals. I love the idea that you can choose to get different protein sources. You can get whey protein, which is fantastic for preserving lean body mass, especially with NutriBurn, right? And then the others, looking at plant-based proteins. So whether it's pea protein, rice protein, soy protein, all super choices, especially soy protein. And I know that some people wrinkle their nose around soy, and I don't know why, because soy, if you look at the literature, it's incredible. In fact, I was just lecturing right before I went to Ottawa. I was lecturing to some cardiologists about soy. And I asked them, I said, do you have any issues around soy? And they mentioned some things about, you know, just basically things that are more emotional, not very well founded. And I said, do you know the literature about soy protein and isoflavones helping with reducing blood lipids, you know, blood fats? helping the liver to work better, helping with better body composition, helping men and women with hormone health. So I think that all of these choices that you have here are wonderful and give you the complexity that people are looking for. Now, the last one here, and I'm going to go into this a little bit more in the following slides, is cleanse. Now, cleansing is really key, and I love your products for this. You've got multiple products that you can choose from if you want to take more of a TCM, traditional Chinese medicine approach, or you want to take more of a Western medicine approach. I think that that's great. You've got many different options. Now, why would we be talking about cleansing when we're really talking about weight loss? What is the connection here? Well, there's a huge connection. If you look at the number of different chemicals that have been identified, we're looking at something on the order of 80,000 different identified chemicals in the environment today. I'll just repeat that because it's really a staggering number, 80,000. And just think that there are probably chemicals that we have no idea about, but they're metabolites. They get into the water. They get into the air. There's conversion. They're taken up by animals. We are eating so much and taking so much in the way of these chemicals unlike ever before. Now, when we look at the studies out there, what we see is that these toxins are virtually everywhere, right? We can't avoid them. So no sense creating any fear around that. What we have to do is just really become knowledgeable about what we can do. What nutrition can we bring into the body in order to release these toxins? So here is a long list of different places that we can be exposed to toxins. You know, one very simple one is water. Water is key. In fact, when people ask me, they say, Deanna, you're such an expert in detox. You love detox. You work so much with all these detox programs. What is the one thing that I can do in order to help reduce the amount of toxins I'm taking in? And what I say to them is, think of water. Most of your body is water, 60 to 80%. You're drinking water every day. You're cooking in water. You're bathing in water. You've got water all around you. So why not look into the levels of toxins that are currently in your water supply? And you'd be surprised what you find, right? And we can be drinking and taking in all the great nutrients that we can, but if we're overlooking some basic ones, like just even drinking water, then, you know, it's almost like we're pushing that rock up the hill only to have it fall back on us, right? So we do what we can in order to minimize our exposure. Detoxing is so different for everybody, and I know we're going to take a little pause after I'm done talking about detox because I want to hear any other questions or comments that you have on this section and why I'm even talking about it when it comes to weight loss. The reason why we need to have detox tied into weight loss is because the science shows that we don't all detox the same way, which means that we are all going to be very variable depending on our liver enzymes, depending on our gut microflora. In fact, there was just a study that came out, I believe it was last week, that showed that when people had certain gut microflora, and you all know that we've got more gut bacteria than we do cells of our own body. We are basically walking vessels for these gut microbes. So if we have a war going on with our microbes, we have lots of dysfunction in our body. But if we have good microbes, what we have learned is that we can help to fuel and get things out of the body. There are certain good gut microbes that even help to eliminate heavy metals like mercury. So we've got to pay attention to these things. They're great, big, huge in terms of making a difference on our physiology. So everybody is so different. We all live in different places. I know that many people on the call are from all over the world, so there are so many variables as to where we live, what we're exposed to, what our body is capable of. Are we eliminating right? Or do we have nutritional deficiencies? Detox as a process in the body is nutrient requiring. What does that mean? That means that we need cofactors and nutrients for the different enzymes to rev the detox process in the liver. We need fiber. We need proper hydration to be eliminating things out the stool. So really important, and many people ask, well, can't I just go fast? Can't I just stop eating and that would be my cleanse or my detox? And I say that long term, that's not such a great strategy. We need protein, we need antioxidants, we need minerals to drive those enzymes to work well. So as you can see here, there are lots of different things that can really determine why detoxing would be different for every single person. We're all working with different things, right? And anytime we've got inflammation in the body, that means that we're probably not effectively even working with our liver and our gut to move these things out of the body. Now, how does this tie directly into weight loss? I want to show you this. I think that this is really fascinating. And if you happen to be able to see this slide that I'm showing right now, you're going to see a lot of pathways, a lot of arrows and metabolites. I don't really want you to look at all the details of that. What I want you to do is just kind of look at it as art. Zoom out, kind of look at the overall picture here. But essentially what I'm showing at the top is glycolysis and how our body uses glucose for energy. And at the bottom, I'm showing you the Krebs cycle, essentially how our body harnesses energy from fat, carbohydrate, and protein. Now, for each of these two different metabolic cycles, which provide most of the fuel for our bodies to work, what we see is that there are a lot of these little red lines or arrows or different compounds. Here's where we see the influence of hormones on the system, especially estrogen. So anywhere you see a red arrow, that denotes that there's an influence of estrogen on that particular part of the pathway. So there's lots of red, isn't there? Meaning that estrogen is strongly connected to metabolism. Why is it that perimenopausal women struggle with weight and gaining weight, trying to lose the weight? I see this time and time again. It's because their estrogen levels are changing, which is really going to drive and change these pathways. Now, aside from absolute estrogen levels in the body, toxins that are in our environment can act like estrogen. In fact, they can become very dysfunctional types of estrogen. And in the scientific literature, these dysfunctional estrogenic components, which are toxic in the environment, are considered to be what they call obesogens, meaning that they are part of the reason for some people as to why they might be getting obese, because they are not just eating poor food. Maybe it's nothing about the food, because there have been studies before where animals are fed the same food, and then in one of the litters of animals, they inject toxins. These toxins lead to the obesity of the animal. It has nothing to do with their food. It has only to do with their exposure to the toxins. And in fact, it's almost like some researchers would suggest that the body becomes obese in order to better dilute those toxins. We create that system of inflammation in the body. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an inkling as to why we would be talking about toxins in obesity, because they can cause obesity. Also, toxins like fat. Many of them are lipophilic, which means fat-loving. So when we start to lose weight, what's going to happen? We're going to start liberating toxins. And in fact, it's very interesting to see that with more weight loss comes toxin release into the blood. Now, why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this because it's very important to be focusing on a detox protocol or regimen before somebody actively engages in losing lots of weight. Have you ever noticed that some people, when they start losing weight, they may not initially feel good? They might get tired. They might even have symptoms that might be even correlated with more of like a detox. And I've noticed that. And so what I think is very important to acknowledge here is looking at how we can better facilitate longer-term healthy weight loss and making sure that we have proper removal of toxins. So again, this study is simply showing that as weight comes down, which is indicated by that black line, body weight comes down over time, the gray bars indicate that toxins are going up. Organochlorines, these are the persistent organic pollutants that are in our environment. So definitely something we want to be focused on. There are 3 major toxins to be thinking about, or classes of toxins: bisphenols, persistent organic pollutants, and there are a number of them. Anything with chlorine in the name typically is an organic pollutant. Heavy metals are also something that we want to be on the lookout for, right? So things like arsenic and mercury. In fact, I was just reading a study today that showed that mercury levels in the body, when they become too high, they can sequester selenium. Selenium is a vital, essential mineral that we need for so many different processes, and especially for detox. So when we bind up selenium, it prevents us from detoxing and from getting well. And selenium is needed for so many different functions anyway. So we create lots of chaos in the body with these compounds if they're not addressed properly. Now, the 5 major organs to focus on when you're doing a detox or a cleanse, and I see them as synonyms, right? Cleanse is just another name for a detox in my vocabulary. You want to be focusing first on the gut. Get the gut moving with good, healthy fiber sources. And don't forget to complement the fiber together with water. Get the bowels moving, 1 to 2 bowel movements per day. Most of the mercury that we have in our bodies comes out through the stool. So if we're not moving our bowels, we're not getting a lot of these contaminants out. Super important. Number 1 way to lose weight is just to get our bowels moving, because that right there is a lot of weight to hold within us. And when we're constipated, we actually recycle toxins through our bloodstream, right? So this perpetuates the issue of weight gain. The second organ to really focus on, and you've got a number of great products for this as well. One of the ones that we spoke about earlier today was the herb milk thistle, and how milk thistle and a lot of botanicals can rev the liver and help with transformation, going from phase 1 into phase 2, so that the liver can excrete those into the bile and then into the small intestine. So the liver is key. So many people these days have fatty liver. Fatty liver usually means fatty muscle as well. And liver and muscle are the 2 major organs that respond to insulin. And if we don't respond to insulin, that means that we're not properly processing our glucose. And then we just have glucose running around on the outside of the cells and eventually sinking into fat and essentially becoming storage, fat storage, okay? So that's why we get these issues with insulin resistance, and this is really something that we have to think about. Kidney is also important, making sure that we have proper fluid, proper pH. I know that all of you know about the importance of acid-base balance in the body. If we're over-acidic, we're consuming lots of animal products, lots of the cheese and the wine. I think of my friend, you know, and how acidic these foods can be if they're not complemented with great alkalizing plant compounds, leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables. Nice to bring them both together to have that neutralization. The lungs, I think of deep breathing. One of the cheapest ways to detox and to get toxins out of the body is to breathe deeply, right? It doesn't cost you anything, and you have to do it. So why not make the most of every breath? And then the skin. And the skin is wonderful. It's your largest organ. And through sweat, we can release a lot of these toxins as well. Fortunately, we've got a number of different mechanisms for that. So Scott, why don't I pause here? We covered a lot on detox. I wanted to see if we have any questions or comments that have come up around the role of detox with vitality and or weight loss.
Excellent. This is so fascinating, Dr. Minnick. We have had several comments come in. I will try and capsulize them as best I can. And folks, we just will have to apologize up front that we probably won't get to answer everybody's specific questions. So again, we'll try and do the best that we can by picking out the questions that have a common element, let's say. So first question, Dr. Minnick, if the thyroid happens, if a person is struggling with hyperthyroidism, should they avoid products that increase metabolism, in your opinion?
Well, first you have to look at the underlying reason as to why they're hyperthyroid. Okay? So are they lacking iodine? Are there other issues with metabolism? Is it something genetic? Is it something, even exposure to toxins can change thyroid function dramatically. So I do think it's something to be aware of in terms of not stimulating metabolism with certain agents that are maybe, yes, if we're taking in a dietary supplement and the purpose is to change thyroid function specifically, then I think we want to have some caution there. I think if we do this through food and we allow for detoxification and use food primarily, use a good protein powder, I think really what the thyroid needs is proper nutrition, right? It needs vitamin A, it needs selenium, it needs zinc, it needs vitamin D, and you have a whole talk that is focused on thyroid function. So I think, there are so many questions to really ask based on that question specifically, as to what is the root of why the person has hyperthyroid. Is it nutrient-based? Is there a deficiency there? Is there an inflammatory issue? Is there an autoimmune issue to be looking at? So I think that the answer is quite dependent on what the actual cause. But I do believe that we can help to nourish thyroid through food and eating and looking at certain nutrients.
Okay, excellent. Very good. We've had several people inquire about soy, and maybe a two-part question. One is would surround, the question would be something like this. So what about soy and the possibility of excess estrogen in women? And kind of a companion question, what about soy affecting people that may have thyroid challenges also?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Those are very common questions around soy, right? And I'm sure that people get bombarded with those questions when they're talking about various products. So let me answer the first one first, which is all about estrogen levels. So one of the things with soy, and in fact it's not just soy, we have so many plants within the whole plant kingdom which have what's called phytoestrogens. Phyto is the prefix meaning plant. Estrogen is estrogen, right? And so these phytoestrogens tend to be 100 to 1,000 times weaker than estrogen in the body, okay? So very, very weak signals. And it's not just soy. Flaxseed actually has much more in the way of phytoestrogens than soy. But nobody really talks about flaxseed and says, oh, maybe we shouldn't be having flaxseed because it's phytoestrogenic. Then other ones that have phytoestrogens, anything from the legume family. So garbanzo beans, chickpeas, full of phytoestrogens. A lot of the plant compounds out there already, they're in our food supply and we're consuming phytoestrogens. Now, the key with these phytoestrogens is that many of us do have very aggressive estrogen, what we would call estrogen dominance, meaning that the levels of estrogen in our bodies, and this goes for men just like for women, could be out of balance with other hormones. And so the effects of estrogen can be quite exaggerated, and in some cases create a lot of cell growth and proliferation, because estrogen, especially when it keys into certain receptors on certain cells, can send signals to the DNA to cause proliferation. So what these phytoestrogens do is they very weakly bind to where estrogen might bind. And so they flow the signal and the relay to the DNA about the aggressiveness of estrogen. And in fact, there are different estrogen receptors, and these phytoestrogens, like soy, help to promote more the quiet receptor for estrogen, not the loud, aggressive, proliferative receptor. So there is this idea that for women that are very concerned with cancer, estrogen-sensitive cancers, there is this caution around soy. It's very much a mixed debate. It's still being discussed, but what I can tell you is that really and truly the way that these phytoestrogens work is in the way of competing with the more aggressive estrogen in the body. And that might be a good thing, right? Especially in certain people, and really help to ward off a lot of those negative effects of estrogen. Now, the second part of the question was about thyroid function and whether or not soy impacts thyroid function. So I have a two-part answer to that. The first part is that in products that are heat treated, and many times when we get a soy product, especially a soy protein product, it goes through processing in such a way to inactivate the compounds that would negatively impact thyroid function. Those are called goitrogens. So you find goitrogens in, again, they're widespread throughout the plant kingdom. It's not just soy. Kale has goitrogens. A number of different cruciferous vegetables, right? And so one of the ways to inactivate goitrogens, if we're concerned about those and we have suboptimal thyroid function, is just to heat treat, whether steam the vegetable or, again, some type of heat processing leads to inactivation of these compounds. Typically, what I have seen clinically, and even in talking with my fellow practitioners about this, is that there has to be very, very high levels of these goitrogens, and typically, you know, taking in large amounts that are concentrated in somebody that has very compromised thyroid function to really see an impact. Now, one of the things that I really like just anyway is that steaming food helps to liberate certain things and helps to inactivate other things. Helps to inactivate these goitrogens, but you can also liberate a lot of other nutrients. So helping to minimize your intake by steaming, cooking vegetables a little bit, I think can be a good thing. There's even just one little tip. A woman that I had, a practitioner, Dr. Lise Alschuler, who did talk with me about goitrogens, and what she does is she even steams her kale just very slightly, just to inactivate the goitrogens before she puts them in her smoothie. So again, just that little amount of heat can help to just stop and stop the presence and the activity of these compounds. So it's a good question, comes up very often. It's very rare to see people consuming so much that it really impairs their thyroid function, but theoretically it could happen.
Okay. Excellent. Several people have written in and expressing appreciation for the way that you handled that. I think you put a lot of people at ease that maybe it's not as big of issue as we oftentimes think that it is. Yes. So anyway, thank you. That I think cleared up a lot of question about soy. Someone asked, and I'll take this question. Someone, in fact, several people are wondering, does Nature's Sunshine use GMO-free soy? And happy to say that the definitive answer to that is yes. We get our soy from outside of the U.S., actually, and we have certified that the soy that we do put into our Nature's Sunshine products is GMO-free soy. So that hopefully will alleviate some concern there as well. Maybe a toxicity question or two. Jeanette is wondering, are we in danger of heavy metal toxicity by using Nature's Sunshine Silver Shield? And happy to say that you are not, Jeanette. The type of silver that we use in our Silver Shield has been proven to not accumulate in the body at all, and in fact, it is completely excreted from the body within 24 hours. So there will not be any heavy metal toxicity buildup occur in the body with our Nature's Sunshine Silver Shield. And then Dr. Minnick, a question for you regarding toxicity. I'll just find it once again. Tina is wondering, do you suggest someone with IBS or Crohn's disease go through a detox program? And if so, what products might you think would be safe for that type of a condition?
So IBS and Crohn's disease, whether or not they should go through a detox. So one of the things that you have to be on the lookout for, especially for people with these conditions, with gut conditions that might be inflammatory, is just even looking at fiber, right? Fiber might be something that they may or may not respond very well to. In some cases, it might actually perturb the motility in some ways. You know, with IBS, some people are very different in their presentation. Sometimes they're very constipated, sometimes more diarrhea, and sometimes alternating. So it really depends on the person. I think in general, what you're looking to do is reduce inflammation and to really create that sense of calmness in the gut with IBS and even in Crohn's, really. So using lots of fibers is probably, you know, you want to take that on a case-by-case basis because everybody's going to be, again, very different in their presentation. But one of the things to focus on is also the liver and really helping the liver along in converting a lot of these compounds from their lipophilic state to their more hydrophobic state and then into a form that can be excreted, whether it's through the urine or through the stool. So I would say, yes, by all means, you know, there can be many ways to detox, right? We just spoke about some organs. So focusing on liver, focusing on lungs, especially with breath. And in Chinese medicine, we see that there's a combination and a connection between large intestine and lung. So when you work on the lung, you're essentially working on the large intestine. And if you think about that, even a nice deep breath, what you're doing is you're pushing down that diaphragm onto the transverse colon and creating lots of nice movement and relaxation. So yes, I do think that there can be a place for different ways to do detox. And I think you just have to tailor it to the individual and what their symptoms are and what they're experiencing. Okay. Good question, by the way. Excellent question.
Makes great sense. Thank you, Dr. Minnick. I think with that, we can probably proceed forward.
Okay, great. And just to do a time check, so we've got about 10 minutes. Because I want to dive into stress.
I think,
okay, all right, good. We've got some
great.
flexibility there. All right,
Perfect.
Great.
You betcha.
So let's dive into the one I have a lot of passion around is actually all of these three, but we've already addressed some things with hormones and thyroid. So let's dive into the ones that we haven't gone as much into. And that would be, I did mention this briefly when I spoke about insulin and insulin resistance, but didn't really get into the stress connection here. Now, in fact, this is a massive, massive influence on not just our body weight, but our overall psyche, our body, any kind of chronic illness that we might experience may or may not, and typically does, have a stress implication. And even I remember reading in the Journal of the American Medical Association some years ago, I think it was published in 2008, there was a statement that 80 to 90% of chronic diseases are connected to stress. So we have to acknowledge this when we're focusing on weight and trying to lose weight, because if somebody is very stressed, it's going to be harder for them to lose weight. They can be eating all the best foods, taking all the best supplements, but at the end of the day, if they continue to be stressed, they're going to be upregulating their sympathetic nervous system, which turns things on, makes them hyperreactive, changes their immune function, can create leaky gut. So it's not to say that we should not be following good nutrition when we're stressed. We definitely need it, but we also need to be focusing on nutrients that will help to calm us down. So stress is a biggie, and it's especially a biggie now that so many people are stressed, right? I think that this is an epidemic. It truly is. So Scott, maybe you can go, if you can advance the slide. For some reason it's...
Oh, did it freeze up?
Yeah, so maybe
okay,
you can just advance it for me.
Let's, okay.
Maybe I'll just ask you to advance from here on out.
We
easier.
Sure could. Let's try this. Okay, I think with a couple of taps.
Yay, there we go. Yay.
Great.
All right, so one of the things just to even focus on is how we're always in the mode of doing. So, you know, again, in Chinese medicine, the yang, the active, the outward, and balancing that with more of the yin, which is more the reflective, the contemplative, maybe not speaking so much, but just listening, being quiet, not having so much stimuli around us is important. And yes, it ties into weight and in terms of our physiology, what we're taking in. So next slide, Scott. Perfect. So there is acute stress, and many of us might have that. Let's just say that, you know, we've got something due, we've got to take a test, we've got to give a speech, we've got some kind of health crisis. There are acute stresses, and many times we recover from those. Chronic stress is what we have to worry about. Chronic stress is the stress that lingers. It doesn't go away. And in fact, it may perpetuate itself. We're always in that state of anxiety. And just even having anxiety creates more anxiety. Now, I know that you've got a number of products to help with a hyper-reactive, high cortisol output. And one of the agents that I like very much in your products is L-theanine. And I remember just even being with Dr. Tripp talking about some of the research that you're doing in this area. This is something that I think Nature's Sunshine really excels in, is the line of products for stress. I think they're wonderful, and you've got a number of different options. Next slide, Scott, please.
Okay, and I think it should be working now, so sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, if you want to hit the down
it.
arrow twice, there we go. I think.
Oh, okay, perfect. So the adrenal glands, you know, some of the basics of the adrenals is that, oops, there we go, is that the adrenal glands, which sit at the top of our kidneys, help in the metabolism of protein, carbohydrate, and fat. And we also produce cortisol from these glands. So if we're squeezing out lots of cortisol, what can happen is then it starts to change how our body receives insulin. And when we change that, we change our blood glucose, and then we get high glucose. We start to get fatty muscle, fatty liver. And here's the key. Whenever you see belly fat, we call this, the fancy term in science, as visceral adipose tissue, VAT. VAT fat. And VAT fat is essentially when we have that belly fat, sometimes referred to as the muffin top. This is a sign that there has been a lot of cortisol produced. Okay? This is often associated with metabolic syndrome, pre-diabetes, and it's not good to have fat around the middle. And the reason why is because you're coating organs in fat. And fat is not inert. It's very metabolically active, and it produces its own inflammatory messengers. So just imagine that you've got this fat sitting right there around your liver, or sitting close to your stomach, or sitting nestled right there with your small intestine, and how inflammatory that can be. So with the 3 stages of stress, there is this progression. Right? There's the arousal state where initially we get stressed, and I know Scott and I felt that this morning, and you know, as we were putting on the webinar, it wasn't working. We feel that arousal, right? And I know that all of us have gone through this. Then there's kind of that adaptation where we start to see changes in our metabolism, and this is where I get worried with people that are trying to lose weight, when they have adapted to stress at a very high level. And then eventually, they become exhausted. You think that they're going to be able to move or go and exercise and try to lose weight? No way. They are so exhausted, they cannot even get the energy to get out of bed. So they're in a state of being they have hypoimmunity. Their immune system now is not working properly, and they have what would be called adrenal fatigue or adrenal exhaustion. Now, despite all this talk about stress, there is also a necessity for some degree of stress, right? We wouldn't have life without stress. So see if you can put yourself in one of these presentations. So there's a typical type A person, right? Kind of the person that reacts quickly, gets very red and inflamed, gets upset over very trivial things, finds it very difficult to relax. They tend to have a lot of nervous energy. They're impatient and irritable. They can't wind down. They're agitated. So this is the typical presentation where there is more cortisol, more reactivity amongst what we would call HPATG. Do you know what that stands for? It stands for hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal, thyroid, gonad. So even though we're talking about the adrenal glands here in stress, the adrenals are really just a broker for that cortisol. That cortisol is going to travel all throughout the body. It's going to impact the thyroid gland. It's going to impact testes and ovaries. It's going to impact pituitary gland. So we're essentially creating a ripple effect when we're stressed throughout many different systems. Now, imagine over time that you've produced a lot of those cortisol compounds and you've changed up your endocrine glands and you've got changed thyroid function now because you've had so much stress. What happens now that you've exhausted your reserve, right? So here's where you might start to see fatigue. You can't move. You have just got immune issues. This is where autoimmune disease typically starts to come in. Depression and unable to really sleep just the standard normal number of hours. I noticed that you have a lecture on sleep coming up, which is so very important. I hope that you all go to that talk because sleep is important for cortisol production. When we sleep at night, this restores our body's immune system, also helps with detoxification. I think that many people are not losing weight and are staying in this perpetual state of being overfed and undernourished because they're not getting sleep to replenish. They're staying in the doing stage, they're keeping wired and tired, and they're not getting to the place of rest. So they're not going to lose weight in that state. They need to sleep. They really do. In fact, the national average, last time I checked with the National Sleep Foundation, I believe the national United States average at least is 6.8 hours per night, and I think that that's probably even high compared to what I have surveyed from people. Typically what I see is that people sleep 5 to 6 hours per night, and I bet if we did a survey on this call, I bet probably 50 to 60% of you would fall, although you're a healthier bunch, maybe not so many people, but maybe 20 to 30%. A huge chunk of people that I see as patients are only sleeping that amount, and they think that that's okay. They got used to it. And I said, no, your body has acclimated, but it's paying a price. You can't do that long term. You're going to start producing more cortisol with less sleep. So with less sleep, we get more inflamed, and then the next day, guess what? We wake up and we have cravings for sugar. This is classic. This is scientific. It's also clinical. I've seen that happen. And the reason why we crave sugar is because we are trying to get energy to do something. We don't have the energy because we didn't sleep. So we start masking it with all the sugar. So all of this cortisol over time is going to have a ripple effect throughout our whole body. We're going to be changing, again, insulin. We're going to be creating more fatty muscle, more, and the reason why we care about the muscle is once it becomes fatty, then we start to change our basal metabolic rate. Our muscle is not robust anymore. So we start getting hyperglycemia, and we start down the path of having all kinds of issues with insulin. I'm not going to take you through this very detailed cartoon of a cell, but essentially all this is showing is that when we can't respond to insulin, glucose is going to stay on the outside of the cell. It's not going to come in. So the cell will remain in that very, I would say, undernourished state where we can't access energy. So we start to get fatigued. So I hope that, again, focusing on sleep, making sure that we get good relaxation, that we are taking in nutrients to calm us, to relax us, and then also balancing when we need to activate, because there's a time and a place for both of them. So I'm not going to take you through all the tips for getting a good night's sleep. You're going to hear much more about that, but it is very important to be aware of. Now, when it comes to cortisol, let me just give you a sense of what you might want to be thinking here, okay? So with caffeinated beverages, having too much coffee, too much soft drinks, and all these energy drinks with high amounts of caffeine, and people are just doing lots of that. I do see a medicinal point of having some caffeine for certain people, but for others, they're using it as a crutch to stay awake because they're not sleeping, they're stressed, and they're getting big bellies, okay? You also want to limit or avoid alcohol because alcohol will be leading to, especially in excess, can be leading to these metabolic changes as well. Eating regular planned meals in a relaxed environment and reducing a lot of those simple carbohydrates. The nutrients that we need for stress are the following, and you have a wonderful product that specifically targets these nutrients. I love it because you're getting the adaptogens, which are plants that can read the signal of your body which way your adrenal glands need to go. Do they need to go higher and be stimulated, or do they need to go lower and be relaxed? So adaptogens are fabulous for that reason. And also getting the vitamins, like the B vitamins and vitamin C, which are needed to make cortisol, which is why, I think many times people get sick when they're stressed because what happens? They deplete their vitamin C and their B vitamins so quickly because they're trying to produce cortisol to respond to stress. And so then they deplete that, then they don't have that available for all the other processes. And zinc and magnesium, fabulous nutrients. And zinc is important for wound healing, for the immune system. Magnesium, I think everybody on the street is short in magnesium. Everybody. I think that, we're not eating the foods that are rich in magnesium. Magnesium is needed for 300 plus reactions in the body, many of which are tied to metabolism. In fact, you probably know this, but even type 2 diabetics are notoriously deficient in magnesium. So what does that tell us? It tells us that magnesium plays a very important role. Just remember, M for magnesium, M for metabolism. There's a very strong interconnection there. So you've got Anxious Less, which is the product that Dr. Tripp talked about last year when it was launched. Fabulous, again, lots of studies to support the different actives in the product. And what you're going to get there is not just less fight or flight, which is very true because you're going to have less in the way of the cortisol, and you're going to have less of the effects of all of this. The stress eating that accompanies having all of this cortisol flowing through the blood. And, many people are stress eaters, right? So what ends up happening is that when they're in that chronic stress state, they are making poor food decisions. They're on the run, they're stressed, they need comfort foods. So this will help with them making better food decisions. And you've got a number of other products that will help with the glandular support, really helping with thyroid. It sounds like there's a lot of question about thyroid function and just different nutrients. Thyroid support, making sure that we get those micronutrients and vitamins that are going to help, whether we have hypo or hyperthyroid issues. And typically, more people have hypothyroid. And it's not just hypothyroid, it's subclinical hypothyroid. Many times we fall under the radar. It takes the thyroid some years to really see that in the lab, but we already know that the thyroid function is changing. People have cold limbs, they feel sleepy, they're losing hair, they have changes in their heart function. Adrenal support, this is perfect because again you're getting the full complement of the different nutrients to help with the adrenal glands. So Scott, let me just stop here for a second because we are about 5 minutes after the hour. Let me just address any questions that anybody has around cortisol, insulin, stress as it relates to weight loss.
Okay, excellent. I think as I've been watching the questions come in, I think you've covered them. Some of the people posed questions, and then right after that you answered it with the next slide. So maybe one question, do you have a preferred type of magnesium that you would suggest, and maybe how much a person should take?
Again, there are going to be a lot of questions about the person themselves in terms of what they need, what their conditions are. There are certain conditions like a diabetic that might need a little bit more, but I'll just give you a range. I typically like to think about somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 to 600 milligrams per day taken throughout the day. Not all in one big dose, but really to sustain those good magnesium levels throughout the day, I think is fabulous.
Okay.
And I actually like a lot of the different magnesium forms. So, different types of magnesium for different effects.
Okay, very good. A question I think that's appropriate for this part of our discussion. Do you run into people that struggle with low cortisol very often? And if so, any suggestions for that type of a condition?
Yes. Well, low cortisol can be because of adrenal fatigue. So essentially what happens is, and I was like this, about 7 years ago, I had a very high pressure life. I was in a professional working environment. I had lots of responsibility. I had no time for play. And I had my adrenals measured, my function of my adrenals, and I flatlined. I had absolutely no cortisol production. And you're supposed to have the highest amount of cortisol in the morning. So, you wake up and you feel that sense of purpose. You jump out of bed, and, that's when we should have a lot of energy. But for me, in this particular situation, having a low cortisol. So what can be done is a number of different things. I do think that adaptogens can be phenomenal because, remember, they're modulating. They're not just stimulating, or they're not solely reducing function. They're actually really, I see it as tapping into the wisdom of your body to see what you need in modulating that. So one of the first things that I did is I went on adaptogens, and there are so many different ones. And one of the ones for people that might need a little bit of help with cortisol, licorice root is commonly used for that purpose. Various other ones, Eleuthero, there's also rhodiola, ginseng. There are a variety of different ones that can be used to help the adrenal glands if they're exhausted. And also just repleting with a good vitamin and mineral core. Because anybody that has adrenal fatigue, they are just starved of many different nutrients. It's not just squeezing out more cortisol, it's supporting the body. So I look at protein, because somebody that has produced a lot of cortisol over time, they start to break down their protein, they start to break down their muscle. And the reason why they did that is because they wanted to get energy. It's one of the ways that our body makes glucose when we're not processing it properly from food. And so they have a lot of muscle breakdown. And so good quality protein for somebody that has low adrenal function is super important, especially in the morning. Really important for some. In fact, there's a great book that goes through this a little bit more in terms of more set protocols. It's called Adrenal Fatigue by Wilson, James Wilson. It's one of my favorite books on adrenal function. So I think just overall getting good quality foundational nutrition, and then with appropriate supervision, looking at adaptogens for the right adaptogen for the right person.
Excellent. Very, very good. And the questions, comments that are coming in are outstanding. You're getting a lot of props from our listeners, Dr. Minnick.
Oh, yay. That's great.
Yeah,
well, that's why we're doing this, right? We want to help everybody with the information.
That's right. And Alice asked a question that I think is a nice segue to the next part of the discussion that I want to make sure we have time to cover. She says, how do you deal with emotional eating?
Yes. What a great question.
Yeah, you lined us up perfectly, Alice. Thank you.
What a great question. All right, so let me just skip forward a little bit here. And Scott, do I have control of the screen again?
You might have to, yeah, sorry. You may have to double tap again or hit the arrow a couple times. That should bring back control.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, all right. So this is something I have a lot of passion around. Let me just give you a statistic here. Over 75% of overeating is due to emotions. 75%. That's a lot, meaning that there's a huge, gosh, I almost see it like an iceberg, right? We just see the tip of the iceberg at the top in the water, right? But then underneath there's all this undiscovered terrain that we haven't tapped into with eating. So we can learn a lot about somebody by how they're eating, not just what they're eating. And so there's a great book out there by Dr. Brian Wansink that I love. It's called Mindless Eating. He talks about all the things in our environment that are determining what we're eating, how we're eating, and the emotions that come up, the emotional eating that we see. So one of my mantras is really this whole idea of how we eat is how we live, and how we live is how we eat. So you can get a good idea about somebody by just looking at the food choices that they make, because that's like a little microcosm of what they're taking in on a bigger life scale. So with emotional eating, one of the things to be thinking about is, first of all, what is it? And many people say, well, does that just mean I have cravings, or, I sit in front of a plate of food and I just eat it all because I'm looking for comfort? Emotional eating is when we experience an emotional event and we jump right away into eating food. And typically that's not very healthy food that we're drawn to. If we were emotional eaters and ate broccoli or spinach, that might actually be a really good thing. But in the cases of emotional eating, we're reaching for, what the studies show and what I have experienced clinically, is we're reaching for the nutrient-poor, high-calorie snacks, ice cream, potato chips, chocolate is a big one. And we create this cycle. We create this cycle with those food choices. So one of the things that can help us with emotional eating, and I look at this all the time, is how the environment that we're eating in. The people that we're eating with can determine some of our food choices. The size of our plate. I mean, look at this statistic. This comes from Dr. Wansing's work. 72% of our calories come from food that we eat from bowls, plates, and glasses. Now, I grew up in the Midwest, and I was told as I was growing up, and I bet some of you were too, to eat everything on your plate. And so just imagine, you kind of get that message as a kid, and then you start thinking, okay, I can never waste food. So you go to a restaurant and you get a massive plate of food, and then you kind of feel like, well, maybe I have to eat everything because, it's kind of the target, right? So how do we help ourselves, especially when we feel like we're emotionally eating? One of the things we can do is re-engineer our eating ware at home. Have smaller plates, smaller glasses, smaller everything, because everything is getting bigger and bigger anyway. And also slowing down our eating rate. This is a very interesting study where they looked at the number of bites that kids were taking in every minute. So they would sit and watch them and monitor them. And what they found is that the overweight and obese kids were having more bites per minute than the normal weight kids. And the parents of the overweight kids also had an accelerated eating rate, which means that they weren't taking their time. So there is this essence of connecting with our emotions, having mindful eating throughout the day, making sure that we're not binging. I grew up as an emotional eater. I had a lot of restriction placed on me. And, my mom was a health nut. My dad was kind of a junk food dad, but my mom was the one making all these decisions for us in the house around food. And for me, having all these restrictions about what I could and couldn't eat just led to more emotions around food, and it became very, just difficult for me to work with. And I was a teenager, really going through a lot of different emotional issues just through my own development personally and just body-wise. So I completely understand the idea of emotional eating and have even thought about, how do we really combat it? How do we work with it? And so one of the issues here that I hope that you're getting is awareness. Really being aware, taking our time when we're eating, when we have an emotion, not stuffing it down with food, because that's what many people tend to do, right? Rather than feel, we eat. And again, not choosing all the best food. Now, one of the products that you have that I like very much is Stixated. And as part of working with cravings, I think that many people need an alternative. They need some way to put a patch on the process so they can figure things out, they can get a handle, so they can start losing weight and feel more confident and get better self-esteem so that they can make better choices. So having something like Stixated here, which again, leveraging a plant, an herb, Garcinia, and taking chromium picolinate, which I love because many people that have food cravings, especially for carbohydrate, are deficient in chromium. These are going to help with curbing appetite. And some of the recent research on Garcinia also shows that it helps to modulate serotonin levels in the brain, meaning that your serotonin, if that is better regulated and balanced, you're going to be in a better mood, and then you're not going to be driven to a food choice that may be not as good. Because there's that food-mood interconnection, right? I know that when I eat emotionally, if I look at the past and what I've done, I mean, for me, it's sweet foods, absolutely, and chocolate. You know, how many of us don't like chocolate? How many of us wouldn't reach for something like that if we might feel emotional? But having the awareness, having something like Stixated to come in and help us to modulate mood, as well as to work with our sense of satiety and to curb our appetite, because what we're doing is we're changing our template. Many people are craving because they have physiological reasons to crave. We don't have nutrients that are feeding us in such a way, so we just start to crave, right? I think that, and I'll close with this slide, Scott, because I think that this is really the essence of what people were wanting to know, and this is, we covered a lot of the thyroid and hormone, and this is the last piece of really diving in. And just at the convention in Ottawa, what we did was a little exercise on stage where we did what I call the laddering activity. So as I just mentioned, there are physiological and potentially psychological issues as to why we crave foods. Now, one example, I'm going to give you a real case study of a patient I had who craved potato chips. Absolutely craved. She could not understand why. We checked out her nutrient levels, and I looked at her way of eating. There didn't seem to be anything that stood out to me. So we started to go deeper into her psychology around potato chips. So what I did is, it's a very simple activity, and you know, you can try it in a situation with somebody and test it out. But essentially, I had the word potato chips, and I said that to her over and over again, and her role was to say to me the first thing that would come to her mind the moment I said potato chips. And what happened as we were going through this activity was, by the third time I said potato chips, she broke down crying. And I said, what's wrong? She said, well, I just got a memory that came back to me about potato chips. And I said, well, what was it? And she said, I have a memory of being 11 years old, and my parents are going out to a movie. I'm the only child. You know, she grew up without siblings, so she was alone a lot. And she said that as her parents were leaving and going out the door, her mother would give her a bag of potato chips with dip. And so for her, what she realized in that moment, and I even have goosebumps now because I remember how pivotal of a revelation this was for her. She even sent me a card afterwards. She said, I can't believe how we found this out, that potato chips for her was connected to the feeling of comfort, to the feeling of that she was lonely. So we talked about the more psychological aspects of what could she do when she was feeling like reaching for potato chips. If she can now bring in the whole idea of, now she knows that she's aware around potato chips and why she's reaching for them. Now we create strategies, nutritional strategies, other physical activity strategies, maybe walking away. You know, the 15-minute wait out where you walk away, come back, you know, get some fresh air, reset your neurotransmitters, and then you're set to go. Calling a friend. You know, there's so many different alternatives. So yes, I'm really glad for the question about food cravings. Thank you very much, because we have to look at emotional eating. We have to look at the role of emotions, how we can support the body so that we're supporting neurotransmitters in our mood, in our behavior, and then also looking at the psychology that might be underlying a lot of these issues in conjunction even with nutrients. Any other questions, Scott?
You know, this has just been absolutely outstanding. I think for many of our people, we have a new favorite, a new favorite presenter. We add you to the other favorite presenters that we have. Just the comments that are coming in on my screen are just so complimentary towards you and this outstanding information. People are saying, give her plenty of time to go through her slides. Don't make her feel rushed. Keep it coming. Wow. Yeah, Sharon wrote in three big, well, in capital letters, wow, wow, wow. This is a fantastic webinar, and I think she speaks for everybody that's been part of our discussion tonight. So our hope is that we can get you back at another time. And,
would love to, absolutely.
That is fabulous. I'm going to just click towards the wrap-up slides, the wrap-up part of our seminar tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for sticking around as long as you have, and I'm sure you would certainly agree with me that this has been time incredibly well spent, that you know so much more about gosh, the thyroid, the pathway of detoxification, the right formulas to consume, the emotional eating. We've just been richly fed by this great discussion with Dr. Minnick. Now, as I go through these slides, just a little reminder that all of these slides are available currently for you to download at your convenience. Tonight, if you'd like, tomorrow, we'll have this full webinar back up and available at nspwebinars.com. About, let's say about noon Mountain Time tomorrow, so you can revisit so much of what she shared with us. And I think it's worth digesting perhaps a couple more times to just glean all of the great information that we have